If you've thought about starting a robot mower business, if you're in the lawn mowing industry and you've thought about adding robot mowers as a line of business, if you've thought, when am I going to be able to solve my labor problem and add robot mowers? Like, when is this really going to be a viable option? I'm going to tell you about the only business model I currently see working from a home services standpoint. I'm not talking about commercial, I'm talking about home services, residential. And at the end of the video, I'm going to tell you about the two business models that are coming. I've had a robot mower mowing my property for 5 years. I've been on the board of a robot mower company for 4 years. I know a ton of people in the industry. They're the people that are moving the industry forward, that they're actually building. I also own a company in the industry, so I understand the data of the business and I understand what reality is in terms of actually implementing robot mowers. As I'm talking, as I'm laying out these three business models, what you're seeing on your screen is this company called Sensori Robotics. It's really cool. They were at my house this week, and what you're seeing is they brought out 5 mowers. They dropped those 5 mowers on my property. They then grabbed what looked like an Xbox remote. They drove one of the mowers around the perimeter of my property. The system then did a calculation, call it for 10 minutes. And when that calculation was done, it uploaded all the data to the cloud. Only has to be done one time when you take on a new property. They hit a play button on a mobile device. Those 5 mowers scattered. They divided up the property so they would all finish mowing at roughly the same time. And they did a pretty darn good job. And something to know is I have 52 zones, irrigation zones at my house. And my system runs all the time because I have so many zones. And it had just finished watering the lawn in the middle of the night when they got there at, I think, 8 a.m. So the lawn was really wet. So given how wet the lawn was, I was pretty impressed. This is interesting technology. I'm going to talk about this and one other business model at the very end of the video, but what you're seeing is really cool. Now, I think of there being 3 business models. One is leave at the property. I'm going to talk about that model. That's the most viable model at the moment. Another is you drop the mowers and you go. I'll explain that later. And then drop and deploy. I'll explain that later. So let's start with the one model that I think is the most viable right now. And then later we'll talk about the 2 that are coming. Robotic mowers are working in specific commercial applications, but again, we're talking only residential, and we're focused on the leave at your property business model. That's the only one that I think is viable. And let me describe what that model looks like. I believe a couple things. One, you have to have a target market that can afford this. There needs to be lots of properties in your market that can afford it, because if you're just going to do a few, it's too distracting. It's not worth it. It's kind of back to my concept of simplification. It just doesn't make sense to have 4 robotic mowers. You can start out with 4, figure out the model, but you either get in it and say, hey, I'm going to go bigger, or don't even bother. There's just too many things, too many moving parts. I also believe that your properties need to be about an acre or greater. So that sort of defines the market. My property is about 4 acres, but the area that my robot mower mows is, call it 3/4 of an acre. And it's a perfect setup. I wouldn't normally say a half acre to 3/4 of an acre makes sense, but in this case, it works because my property is perfect for it. I generally think you need an acre plus to justify it. This is an affluent to a luxury offering at this moment in time, meaning you are going after clients that are willing to pay more to have their property maintained because they want the benefits that come with the robot mower. So let me pause there and tell you what I think the benefits are. After all these years of having one mow at my house, property looks perfect all the time. I mean, I really, really legitimately like it. I get my lawn care for free. I own a company in the business. I would rather have the robot mower mow my place because it always looks great. The crew is then in and out much faster. There's less noise. There's just a cool factor. You know, if somebody comes over and they see the robot mower, like, what's that? I've never seen that. There's just this cool element. There's so much I like about the mower that for me, I would be willing to pay, and clearly I have been willing to pay more because I bought the mower, to let it mow even though I could get free lawn care. That's why I call it a luxury offering. And I'm going to talk, well, I'll tell you right now. The way I think you price is, let's say that the property's an acre or more, whatever that pricing is, let's say it's $350 a week. You charge $350 a week or more. There's no way you charge less. You charge what you would normally charge to come out and mow the lawn or more. And or more is probably exactly what you need to do. And that's why I call it a luxury offering to an affluent market. I live in an affluent area. I live in this pocket of large properties in the millions of dollars, and I'm surrounded by the suburbs where homes are, call it 500,000 to 1.25 million, something like that. And Dallas has become more expensive, but they're nice properties, but they tend to be on smaller lots. My market really isn't even ideal. Like right where I live, yeah, lots of opportunity for this, but frankly, I don't see anybody around here doing it. The models I know of working right now, you have to go out towards the DFW airport. There's some pockets over there where there are tons of multi-million-dollar homes on big properties. Way more than where I live on my side of town. And that's where the model works. And so I'm in Dallas-Fort Worth, which is a massive market. And there are still only pockets. I can name pockets like Highland Park or Park Cities going towards the Dallas area. There are these those mean nothing to you, but I'm just giving an example of inside this giant market, there are pockets where this works. And so that's something you really have to consider. And why do they work? Because they're big properties with very affluent homeowners. And when you get to that market on bigger properties, the math works. It does legitimately work. It offsets the labor cost, and you can make more money per man hour. But you still have different challenges. It doesn't completely solve the problem. It's not perfection. So the model right now is what I've described. That's how you identify the target client. You leave the mower at the property. I believe you own the mower. You don't sell it to the client. You could do that, but I think you own the mower. So you go out and you bid the property. And as I said, if it's going to be $350 a week, you're bidding at least $350 a week, if not more. And then you're selling this option, this opportunity where you'll leave a robot mower on their property and it will just mow. And so every Friday you come out just like you always would have. You edge, weed eat, blow off the concrete areas. And if there's any mowing that's been missed, anything you need to take care of, you take care of it. But the robot mower should have done its job, and so you just shouldn't have to mow. And that's sort of how you sell it to the client. Hey, everything's exactly as though we were coming out once a week to mow your lawn, except your lawn will, most of the time, look perfect. And if there's anything that's not perfect, because we keep coming every week on Fridays, we'll fix it. And so what you're getting is you're getting a higher level of service. But you also have to set expectations. Every so often, something's going to happen. The mower might get stuck on Wednesday. Just some random little quirk might happen, and we might have to send a tech out to fix it, or we might just take care of it on Friday when we're out, and maybe the lawn doesn't look as good as it should, so we'll mow it for you. That's the way you sell this, in my opinion. It's a leave on the property scenario. Also, it may not be able to mow all the areas of the property. As an example, at my home, I have a backyard area of grass that's over half an acre, but of my 4 acres, it's heavily landscaped. And the only other grass section I have is a little bitty grass section up by the street in the front of my property. It makes no sense to put a mower there. So in a case like mine, the crew would show up and they'd get out a 21-inch mower and they'd mow the front area. The back area should be perfect. So all they'd have to do is weed eat and edge back there. So again, on this pricing thing, the math works as the properties get bigger, but you have to charge as much or more as you would if you were showing up every week to mow. I alluded to this. It's critical to set expectations. There are so many little quirks. There are so many little things that will go wrong. Most of the time, the robot mower will work, but something's going to happen. It's not perfect. And if you don't set expectations and your clients expect perfection with the robot mower, they will be disappointed. And so that leads to this idea that you still have to haul all your equipment. So if you buy the robot mower and you have that cost and you put it on the property, you still got to have your ride-on, you got to have your stand behind, you got to have your 21-inch mowers, you got to have all the same stuff you've always had on the truck to deal with the exceptions. because you might still have to mow. And here's an example of the problem. And this is a problem. So imagine that the mowers are generally successful, meaning 80% of the time, the mowers throughout the week mow perfectly, no issues. And so there's like this 20% variance or less where your team has to fix something. It has to mow an area because the mower didn't get it, or the mower stopped working on Tuesday, it's Friday, you need to go ahead and just mow the whole property. Maybe there's some because you're trying to keep a really high level of service. Well, if you've built your schedule knowing that there's a 20%, we'll call it failure rate, and that's maybe being a little too strong in my language, and then it rains all the time and the mowers haven't been able to mow for, call it, almost a week, and you've now got to deploy all of your, you have to have your crews mow all the properties. How do you handle for that in the schedule? Like there's little things like that where, let's say normally 20% of your properties need some kind of touch up or mowing, but now this week it's 50%. That trashes the whole schedule that you've built, where it will push work that was supposed to be done on Friday into Saturday. Another thing, because there are still a bunch of quirks, are you going to build this big enough where you could have a technician? Because I think you need a technician that can deal with these mowers. Go out and deal with quirks, change the blades, do the initial install, like set up the mower on the property, versus having your mowing crews do that. I think your mowing crews should just show up and do the work and do very, very minor adjustments on the mowers if needed. And then the biggest problem of all, how in the world do you pay for all this? There's a debt component here. Now, the industry knows that the debt, taking on the debt of all these pieces of equipment is a bottleneck. There's lots of leasing programs coming or out there. This is going to improve over time, but this is a real consideration. And I think it's one of the single biggest considerations. You have to make really incredible margins to be able to justify taking on the debt that it costs to buy this amount of equipment. And that's why a lot of companies want to sell the equipment to the client. And that makes a ton of sense. But from everything I've seen, that is a really difficult scenario to get a ton of clients to buy this equipment. The much easier scenario is the one I've described. And then one more item. The other difficulty of this business is you really have to profile your properties. These don't, even if the property's over an acre, there'll be a lot of scenarios where it might not work. The trees are too dense, there's too many obstacles. There'll just be some scenario where you look at it, it's like maybe there's a pond, or maybe there's too much of a slope. There's a lot of scenarios where you look at the property and like, it's so close, this isn't gonna work. We're really gonna let the client down. And you have to be hardcore and say no. You have to profile the properties that only take the best properties. So why would you even do this based on everything I've said? And that is the challenge right now, to be very frank. And the reason you do it is because you've got such a labor problem, you're trying to replace it. You're trying to solve it. The other reason you do this is because in the long term, you could scale this business, because the challenge is finding so many people to do the work. But now you could just buy robots and you can solve the problem. You can scale. But it's really capital intensive to scale. And so the advantage will go to all the really big companies that can take on lots of debt, that can raise capital in the capital markets. So you only do this if you're absolutely forced to solve a labor problem. The other reason why you do this is because you have proven that you can massively drive down your per man hour rate. So as an example, maybe you're only making $65 per man hour now. But if you deploy robots, you can make $100+ an hour. That's when it becomes interesting. You get to drive down your COGS and push your gross margin way up. But you've got to push it way up to justify taking on that additional debt. But that's one of the biggest reasons why you would justify this. So that's the state of the industry, and frankly, the only business model I see working right now. The two models are coming. I've hinted at them. One is, and it exists now, it's to drop the mowers off at one property, drop mowers off at the next property, drop mowers off at the third property, and eventually make a rotation back around to pick up one group of mowers and drop them again. And they have hot swappable batteries in them. And then there's the model that you've seen on my screen. And this is a different model, and it's really interesting. And it's the model where you bring the mowers out and you drop multiples of them at the same time, and they mow, and they have hot swappable batteries as well. and you literally just drop them and they know the property and they all scatter and go to where they need to start and they mow the lawn and they stripe the lawn and they're very sophisticated. And when they're done, they all head back to a certain area and the handle pops up and you lift them up and you put them back in the truck. And while your team is there, while these robots are mowing, because they don't have full blade systems on them, you don't have to stand there and watch them. And your team is weed eating and edging and blowing off the concrete areas. And that is a very interesting model. And I can tell you, there are models coming just like this, where they actually use full blade systems, just like you'd have on a 21-inch Toro. But what changes there is somebody literally has to stand there and watch the equipment for legal reasons and regulation reasons. So it's an exciting time. And I constantly hear myself saying, it's coming, it's getting better, I think in 5 years. And that's disappointing. As long as I've been thinking about this, I always feel like in another 5 years. But I will tell you, this week when the equipment you're seeing was at my property, it was really exciting. Doesn't mean it's perfect. Doesn't mean it's fully dialed in. Boy, you can see the glimmer of what's coming in the future.